Back in high school, my friends and I would love to go to our local movie theater, which was situated inside our shopping mall. We usually traveled in big groups, but this time, it was only my friend Alex and me. We picked a late-night showing of some obscure movie. I can't recall the name because this happened years ago and arrived on time to find our seats. Since the showing was late and the movie wasn't a box office hit, the theater was empty. We situated ourselves in the middle, where we could get a perfect view of the screen. Strangely enough, a couple that arrived late decided to sit on our row, with only 2 seats between us and them. My friend and I exchanged confused looks and then shrugged it off, figuring it was solely because we had prime viewing seats. As the theater got dark, things got a little weird. The woman of the pair kept looking over at us every few minutes. The first few times, I figured she was just a nervous person adjusting to her surroundings. Yet, maybe an hour into the movie, she kept the pattern up. She wasn't even discreet with her staring because she'd turn her head completely towards us. I could see her entire face. I still see it in my head today. I nudged my friend and told him about the girl staring, and he whispered that he'd noticed too. At this point, I was feeling very anxious and almost wanted to leave the movie early. My friend didn't want to, though, so I decided staying with him was safer than leaving alone. Throughout the movie, the girl continued to look over. Every now and then, she'd whisper something to her counterpart, but he himself never looked over. Once the movie ended, I grabbed my friend by the arm and told him that we should get going because it's late. He followed suit as I sprinted out of the theater. Once we were out, the halls were empty because barely any films play toward the end of the night. I was about to say something to my friend about how the couple next to us freaked me out, but they ran out of the door seconds after us. I was freaking out on the inside, but decided to try my best to keep my composure. My friend was definitely aware of them closely following us out of the theater, but he isn't the type to be confrontational, so we just sped-walked to my car. Once we got in the car, my intuition told me just to get out of the parking garage as fast as I could. I saw the weird couple make it to their blue car, which was on the same parking garage level as us. That wasn't surprising, because the entrance to the mall is on that level, so everyone parks there. I sped out of the parking garage and drove towards the main street. I told him to keep a lookout and see if their blue car was following us. He looked back and said the coast is clear. I felt so relieved. Now, we were the only ones on the main highway because it was late at night, and we live in a quiet suburban area. Then, a few minutes later, a car came speeding up from behind and flashed their high beams at me. My heart started to race. My head just told me it was them. I asked Alex if the car was blue, and he said he couldn't tell. The light to turn left onto the next main street was green, so I took the left turn necessary to get to my friend's neighborhood. The car backed off and turned on normal lights, but still turned left too. I caught a glimpse of the car and started yelling once I realized that it was the weird couple's blue car. Alex told me to gun it, so I slammed on the gas and sped down the last main street before I had to turn into my friend's neighborhood. The blue car wasn't tailgating me, but was clearly following not too far behind. When the streets are empty, it's easy to follow someone since there aren't other cars to dodge. I turned into my friend's neighborhood, but decided to drive past his street so that they wouldn't see where we were trying to go. The blue car followed us into the quiet neighborhood and was picking up speed to get closer to us. My friend Alex was panicking and asking what I'm going to do. I just kept quiet as I sped too quickly down a random neighborhood street. I could see the car's lights behind me as I made a turn onto another street, but they were far enough so that they couldn't see me for about 30 seconds after I took the next turn. After I turned onto another unfamiliar street, I turned my car off and flipped it into neutral gear. My car is a manual, so I am very familiar with driving it, and knew I had enough momentum to roll into an empty parking spot, even though my car was off. I slipped into the spot on the curb and pushed the brakes to get to a stop before the blue car could clear the turn to get onto the street. I reclined my seat back completely and told Alex to lean all the way forward and not move. We sat there in the silent and dark car, my ears ringing from how quiet it was. My heartbeat was fluttering faster than it ever had before. I think it was a mix of fear and adrenaline. Within a few seconds, the blue car cleared the turn and started slowly driving down the street. It made its way past my car that was parked on the side of the street. Luckily for us, I drive a standard black Scion TC. There is nothing notable about the car. I haven't even changed the license plate frame. So they must have figured that the cars parked on the road belonged to the people that lived in the neighborhood. Alex and I literally stayed in our hiding positions for 10 minutes, just in case the weird couple decided to drive by again. Luckily, they never did. Once we got up, we just stared at each other and didn't know what to say. We were both freaked out and had no idea of what the couple had planned to do if they caught up to us. To this day, I still don't know what their intentions were. Maybe they're just a couple of deviants who enjoy freaking out young high school students. Or maybe they even had a more sinister plan for us. All I know is that I don't go to the theater late at night anymore, unless I'm with a big group of friends. Back in my senior year of high school, I worked at my town's local movie theater. Every week when schedules were posted, they were placed in the box office for staff to grab. Two problems with this. The schedules were easy to reach, meaning anyone could reach their hand behind the glass window inside and grab one. The other problem is that they listed each employee's phone number next to their name on the schedule. This is where my story comes into play. We had a ton of employees, always coming and going, so you did not necessarily need to be dressed in a uniform to grab a schedule. I don't know how long it took for me to notice the creep. I am kind of oblivious when I am focused on my work. I think the first time I really noticed him was when I was cleaning a theater by myself. Everyone had left the theater, or so I thought, and so I turned on the overhead lights to see better. I was minding my own business when the creep comes up from behind me and just stands there. Scares the hell out of me when I turn around and just see him staring at me. He then says, "Hi, Megan," and leaves the theater. After that, I began seeing him every single time I worked. And for my entire shift, like if I worked a 12-hour shift, he would be there for the whole 12 hours watching movies and watching me. Things started getting really creepy when I started getting random texts from a stranger. He basically would tell me he was watching me at work and that I was beautiful and he was going to be with me someday. Me being the overly nice person I am, I basically apologized for not reciprocating his feelings and told him I don't know who he is and to please stop texting me. So a few days later, he shows back up at my work and tells me he is the one who has been texting me. I was like, "Okay, how did you get my number?" He said, "The schedule, of course." Of course. I immediately found my manager and asked her to remove my phone number from the schedule and blocked his phone number. He starts leaving notes and flowers on my car, asking why I blocked his number and if he could take me out. Mind you, this man is like 30 years older than me, so I am like, "Nah, no thanks, dude." I just kind of threw everything away that he left on my car and didn't pay much attention. He starts to get the guts to approach me after work when he knew I was walking out to my car alone and harasses me. So now I had to have my manager start walking me out at night. That just infuriates him more. So basically the tip of the iceberg was one night I was being walked out by a manager. This is like 1 a.m. and he starts running at us and tries to attack my manager. Cue me screaming my head off trying to call 911 while my manager is on the ground wrestling him. He ends up getting arrested. I get my phone number changed, and I honestly do not know what happened to him after that. I moved shortly after for college, so I was not too worried about Mr. Creepy finding me ever again. But let me tell you, that made me so much more aware of my surroundings and the people around me. Pepper spray is now my favorite accessory. Back when I was in high school, my friends and I loved exploring creepy places. A few of us had our driver's licenses, so on weekend nights, we would gather a group of 6 to 10 people and go on an adventure. One summer, our favorite place to go was this abandoned movie theater on the west end of town. This place had closed down probably about 3 years before we started visiting it, and in that time, it had become a run-down building. There were no trespassing signs on the front entrance and each of the fire exits around the building coming from the theater rooms. The glass at the main entrance was all broken and had been boarded up. The front door was busted and didn't latch or lock, so people were able to get inside. We knew there had to be homeless people crashing in there, but we were young and dumb and felt invincible in a group. It was part of what made it scary. We would always wait until between 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. to go into places like this, because we didn't want anyone to see or hear us and report us to the police. We all explored it together the first 2 times we went in. The screens and seats were all torn up inside each of the maybe 8 rooms. The bathroom mirrors were broken, and there was graffiti everywhere. We were fairly sure there were people hiding in there while we were inside, even if we never saw anyone the first 2 times we went. There were a couple of shopping carts from a nearby Fred Meyer inside, with cans and bottles in them, and a few dirty blankets scattered around in different rooms. It looked lived in. After getting to know the layout of the place the first couple of trips, we made a game of it for the 3rd and final visit. This time, the 6 of us that went split into 3 groups of 2, and with our partner, the 2 of us would enter the front together and spend a full 5 minutes inside, while the others waited outside at our chosen exit in the back of the building. The first 2, Beck and Doug, both went in while we waited outside. About 7 minutes went by, and just as we were starting to worry that we should go in after them, they made it out the other side, through the fire exit. Doug told us that they went upstairs into the office, and there was a sleeping bag that hadn't been there on the last visit, and as soon as they went up and saw it, they tried to leave immediately, but they got turned around and tried to leave through the wrong exit, which was sealed shut. They were paranoid that they were being followed out, so they just stood there watching the way they entered the theater room for a minute, making sure that they didn't hear any noises before they finally worked up the nerve to run out the correct exit in the room across the hallway. Doug and Beck both wanted us all to leave, but Jack and I weren't having any of that, and insisted on going in. Brad and Drew, the other group of 2 that was going to go in last, wanted to come with us, so the 4 of us went inside while Beck and Doug both waited by the exit. The first thing we all wanted to do when we got inside was go check out the upstairs office. Just as we started to make our way up the stairs, we all heard a loud banging sound. It was coming from the back of the theater. We all agreed it had to be Beck and Doug trying to scare us so that we would come out and we could leave. We got upstairs, and the pounding stopped. Doug was right. There was a sleeping bag rolled out on the ground, with a few paper bags set up around it. Brad flashed a light in one of them, and saw a syringe, and something that looked like a vibrator. We were all pretty grossed out, and had a little laugh about it. We looked around up there and didn't really notice anything else interesting, and we were starting back down the stairs when the pounding started again. We decided we should probably make our way to the exit. I hoped we hadn't been caught trespassing by the police. We came out through the exit, and immediately, both Doug and Beck were talking over themselves to tell us that about a minute after we entered the theater, a really tall, creepy, homeless-looking man with greasy hair walked right past them, heading for the entrance. Beck said hello as he passed, and the guy stopped, turned, and kind of lunged a few inches toward him before stopping. One side of his face was really wrinkly. Beck thinks maybe he was a burn victim or something. The guy stared him down for a second, and then, without saying anything, turned and walked around the corner where we had gone inside. They started pounding on the door right after he was out of sight, to try and warn us there was a scary dude in there with us. We were in there for about 5 minutes with this guy, and we never saw him. He had to have heard us and hid somewhere. We started to walk back to our car in the Fred Meyer parking lot, about 100 yards away from the theater, and a car pulled into the parking lot and shined its headlights on us before flashing its red and blues. The police officer had us all sit down in front of the spotlight in front of his car and asked us what we were doing. We told him we were going to head inside the movie theater, but a really scary tall guy walked in and we chickened out. He told us that it was really dangerous to go into places like this, as there had been violence in the building before, and it'd be a shame if we got hurt doing something stupid. He let us go, and as we drove off, we saw him shining a light inside the front entrance. We took the nice police officer's advice and never went into places like this again. I never did find out what violence he was talking about. It could have just been a tactic to scare us out of coming back. We stuck to graveyards and cemeteries after this.